Ricky Ian Gordon is an acclaimed composer of musicals and operas and songs. He's a talented wordsmith in writing libretti, and now he's an autobiographical author. Ricky is here to talk about his memoir entitled Seeing Through, a Chronicle of Sex, Drugs, and Opera. Ricky Ian Gordon, thank you so much for making time for us today.
You are so welcome. I'm happy to see you, Brad.
Likewise, I'm happy to see you too. Let's start with your memoir, Seeing Through, because we're also going to talk about the new recording of Sycamore Trees that's coming out on September 20th. But I want to dive into this book with you a little bit. And there's a lot to cover in the book. There are a lot of stories that you tell. It's not for the faint-hearted, shall we put it that way.
No.
What do you want people to get from this? Like a member of the public that may not be as familiar with your music, they're a little interested. And what is it that you want people to take away from this book?
Well, if let can I tell you how it came about, Brad? Because
Yeah,
that is
absolutely.
well, so on March 12th, 2020, um, I was premiering my new opera, Intimate Apparel, at the Lincoln Center Theater, which was commissioned by the Metropolitan Opera and the Lincoln Center Theater. And at that day, every theater in New York closed. And it was, we were supposed to open on March 23rd. And I also had my opera, The Garden of the Fiends and Continis, which was going to be done at New York City Opera. And The Grapes of Wrath was going to be done in Aspen. And basically everything got canceled. So Kevin, my partner, and we came up to the country with our little dog, Lucy. And I I felt like I had to do something else for a while. Like I don't know, I felt mad at notes. I felt mad at music. Like it just felt like everything was over. So at one point I thought about a writing group because I thought I wanted to start a writing group. I thought it would be interesting to like use that part of my mind. And also if I started a group, there would be an imperative to write, you know what I mean? An incentive every week. So I talked to all these writing friends of mine, which they're all poet laureates. And I mean, they're all major writers. And I just said, I don't care if I'm the idiot in the group. Like, you know, it'll be a good experiment for me to see what I come up with. And right away, right from the beginning, because I really admire these writers. I mean, it was like Marie Howe, Nick Flynn, Donna Massini, Victoria Riddell, Richard McCann, Marty Moran, Michael Klein, Vivi Francis, Padraig O'Toonan. They're serious writers. And I thought, I'm not going to mow them down with my as a stylist, right? But what I can, the experiment for me can be to see how deeply I would allow myself to be known. Because I feel like I'm old enough, Brad, that it's more interesting to see what happens when you do something dangerous, when you do something risky, when you do something that feels necessary, as opposed to doing anything safe. Life's too short. And I just wanted to see, like, I have a million secret stories, things I've never told anyone. What would happen if I did? So you have to remember, at that point, I never even thought about publication. I just was writing it for them. So I would bring, they would bring like 8-line poems and I'd have 30 pages of prose every week. And it's like once I started writing, it was seriously like I opened a tap.
Yeah.
I opened a vein, is more like it. And after like say, after a little while, I was the feedback I was getting, I felt like, there's definitely an energy in what I'm writing because the response from the group, oh, Sophie Cabot Black, she was another one of the poets. The energy I was getting was that they were digging it. You know what I mean? So this was purely fantasy, but in February, and I think by now we're in 2021, I read my horoscope in Susan Miller's Astrology Zone, and it says this is going to be like the most amazing month of your life. So I thought I have to take a risk.
You've had some pretty amazing months, I have to
I,
say.
I will I will say that I have, but this was like Susan Miller was like, you better do something big.
Yeah.
So I had met Jonathan Galassi, who was the president of Farrar, Straus and Giroux, which is my favorite publishing company, and he's my favorite editor. And I had met him because, as you know, I had made an opera out of the great poet Frank Bidart's poem, Ellen West. And Frank Bidart is published by Farrar, Straus and Giroux. Jonathan is his editor. And the year I was writing the opera, Frank won the Pulitzer Prize. So at the Pulitzer dinner, which was at Le Bernardin in New York, I was seated next to Jonathan and his husband, Tenoch. We really hit it off. So one day, right after I read my horoscope, I sent Jonathan 2 sections of the book and an email. And I said, Jonathan, this is sort of a lark. It also might be idiotic. You don't even have to read it. But if you do, I will certainly say this. I doubt you have read another composer memoir along these lines. And he wrote me back right away, Brad, and he said, there's definitely something here. And if I were you, what I would do is just keep going. Don't look back. Don't edit. Just because you're so fluent right now, just keep accruing material and see what kind of shape it takes. And then he said, I'd love to send you a book we just published, which was the poet John Giorno's autobiography, which definitely was another X-rated autobiography. So I read that book, and like 2 weeks later, I wrote to Jonathan to tell him what I thought of that book, and I sent him 2 more sections. By now, Brad, I knew nothing. Like I was writing single-spaced, full pages, no paragraph breaks. It was like stream of consciousness. And he got back to me right away, like an hour later, and said, okay, I've read everything you've written. I want to work with you on this. Can we talk in the morning? And he said, it's like Proust. I nearly had a heart attack. I ran upstairs to Kevin and I was screaming, Jonathan Galassi wants to work with me. And the next morning we spoke, and he said, do you have a literary agent? And of course I didn't have a literary agent, but my theatrical agent at the time, whose name was Beth Blicker, set me up with Laurie Liss, who's Rachel Maddow's literary agent. And she's also she's with Sterling Lord Literistic. It's a major, company. Laurie read my pages, said, I want to represent you. She got me a book deal. Brad, I would have paid them to publish it, and I was on unemployment. And she got me enough of a book deal that I could go immediately off unemployment. And the rest is, Brad, it was so weird. When my writing group heard that I got a writing contract with Farrar, Straus and Giroux and Jonathan Galassi, they were like, what? And then Jonathan would get back to me like 8 minutes after I sent him anything. And Laurie Liss had said, don't bother him on the weekends, don't bother him at night, be proprietous with him. This man's very busy. He was like, pish tush, send me everything whenever you write it and send me every word you write. And I swear, Brad, he would like get back to me as if he had nothing to do but read what I wrote. And eventually I sent him 800 pages, single-spaced pages with no paragraph breaks. And then he just was like, okay, you have to cut this in half. And he was great because he didn't tell me what to cut in half, Brett. He would give me suggestions. Like, for example, at the beginning, he said, it seems to me that you're writing about sex, drugs, and music. And I said at the time, don't tell me that, because I don't want to suddenly be limited by what you think I'm writing about. Like, I just felt like, what if it goes in a million different directions? And it did. But the truth is, what he said initially stuck in my head. And once he said that, it's as if a frame started happening in my head. And the title came from the epigraph from the book, which I always knew was going to be the epigraph from the book, from the first word, was a line of poetry. It's a poet named Brenda Hillman. She wrote an incredible book called Death Tractates. And one of the lines in that book is, the job of the living is to be seen through. And that line seems to be how I live my life.
Mm.
I mean, I feel as though what is dangerous about my life and what is rewarding about my life is that I am transparent. You either like me or you hate me, but I'm not hiding anything from you. You know what I mean? So seeing through came from that title because I feel like I'm both seeing through and others are seeing through me. And then the subtitle, I just changed it from, sex, drugs, and opera, because that's what it seemed to be more about in the end. Although there's a huge chapter just on music I love. So that's how it came about. And once Jonathan sort of gave me license, I mean, at one point there were like 20 poems in the book. We were going to use poems as sort of like sorbet between courses. But I just had so much material, Brad. I ended up just narrowing it down and creating a structure and a frame that made sense to me. And really, in a way, it really is sex, drugs, opera.
Yeah. We'll
And
wait for the sequel will be all the cut material.
you got it. I have a whole other book. I really do. I mean, I had a gigantic chapter on foreign film. I had a huge chapter on my first gigantic, disastrous world trip when I was in my late 20s. I went with a backpack to Europe. I mean, I have so many, but what I put there felt necessary. And the idea, Brad, I've never really gotten to tell people what it's like to write what I write and what goes into writing an opera, what goes into writing a song. What do I love? What do I hate? And I was the commencement speaker at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. And so much of it was about, I will give you me, you give me you. That should be the story of your life. There's nothing else that is interesting to give another person other than yourself, what's real for you. And I thought, well, I'm going to live by my own weapon. I'm just, this will be that book. And Jonathan would often say to me, you're only going to write one memoir. Even if you write another one, this will be the one. And the truth is, Brad, though I feel it's dangerous, though I feel it's really exposed, though I was worried I would feel terribly embarrassed when it was out, if anything, I just feel known now. And I look at people, obviously I've gotten really amazing response to the book critically. And there are people who don't like it. And to those people, I feel like they don't like me. They wouldn't like it if it was a better book because they don't like me and they're not going to like a book about me. And, out of what, it's not even about making peace with that. Dem's the facts. You know what I mean? So it's like that. I don't feel exposed beyond measure. I feel known, seen, and heard in a new way. And I look forward to what my life will look like with that being the story. And
Yeah.
that now I can write new stories because so much about me is known now.
Well, it's so interesting to see the juxtaposition that exists between your experiences, which are scatological, some of them in nature, and your music. There's like a connection there that is, once we know you, then your music makes perfect sense. I mean, it all comes together. And that's part of the whole rubric of seeing through, the ability to do that. Was that like a conscious intersection for you, your love of music, your creating music, and the life that you've lived?
No, and the only reason I say no, Brad, because it's so nice to hear you say once we know you, we understand your music. I really think so much of what I do in this world is instinctive. And it's instinctive based on what I have always been was an obsessive compulsive and a trash can. I have a million influences. I know a million things, and they seem to come out in whatever you could call my aesthetic. My musical vocabulary is based on this incredible body of work that I just know.
Yeah.
And my instinct with words is based on everything I've read and everything I've loved. And even though what I've learned, and I know you know this because you have been a composer as well as an incredible singer. I was thinking about you lately because I was thinking about your recording of Songs for Dove when you
Yeah.
recorded the Michael Tippett. And what I want to say about that is I think we end up amazing ourselves at when we see that we have an innate sense of architecture or an innate sense of structure, scaffold. When we see like yesterday, I did this interview for the about the book, and this guy kept reading passages from the book, and he would read them, and I'd think, wow, that really expresses what I meant. Like I don't read this book now, but I did articulate what is true for me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I was amazed yesterday when he was reading it. So in the end, I think like it seems like because I finally listened to the audiobook because I felt like I had to hear what other people were hearing. And I thought, this book feels very structured and very tight to me. But that's instinct. I mean, it
Yeah.
really, it's just, you know how it is. You put notes on a page, and the notes after a while start telling you what to do. And then you see in the end, oh, this is what I did based on what I know. But how intellectual is it really a process? I was just
Yeah.
listening to this interview with Joni Mitchell. She's talking about sus chords. And to be really honest, and we know I love Joni Mitchell, but I was just like, what she sounded like to me was someone who wanted to sound like she knew what she was doing. And you just wanted to say, Joni, come on, you were not thinking about sus chords when you wrote that stuff. That's just bullshit. Like you were writing from your heart and your instinct and your aesthetic. And you weren't sitting there thinking this is what sus chords mean. Nobody does that. I mean, nobody. It's like if people try to pretend that everything is such an intellectual process, it just it foregoes everything that's interesting about creating. And that's Stravinsky knew that. That's why he said, I am the vessel through which passed La Sacra. You're not thinking, I'm going to go from a Neapolitan sixth chord to a minor chord, and that's going to say that I love turtles. It's just like, no, I don't think so. And if you do, probably it's not going to be interesting.
Yeah. I I want to point out though that you say in your book when you're talking about your process, you say that you hate stuff right away when you write it. It grows on you, so to speak. Can you
Yes,
talk a little bit about that? And that I think is intimately tied to all the experiences you've had in your life, right?
yes. Because my first instinct is to feel bad about myself and to feel bad about what I do. And obviously, it's not a mystery, but my primal wound was being criticized, being called names, and having no recourse. So, of course, after a while, you are the wounded and you become the wounder. You know, there's no perpetrators left, so you become them yourself. And if you don't grow out of that, if you don't say, go to therapy, or for me, if you don't recover from alcoholism and drug addiction, then you end up just wounding yourself to death. But for me, at this point, I at least know that I am going to wake up every day with the committee, and the committee is on my shoulder, and they're all telling me how terrible I am. So the first notes I put down for the day, the committee is saying, you suck. But the truth is, as I accrue notes, as I accrue words, my sense of what is beautiful to me starts to take over, and I start to see, no, this is good. This is going to be good. And I know what to do now. And then as a piece starts happening, in spite of me, in spite of the voices, something takes over that I have faith in. And that's where, my faith comes in. I do have faith that I'll figure this out, but boy, this is going to be painful at first. And it always is, Brad. And I learned it after, when I finished The Grapes of Wrath, I thought, oh, now I'm going to be able to write anything now. The next 3-minute song was just as hard. Every time you start something, it's just as hard.
Yeah. Well, you've had some great reviews for this book, I should say. And I want to read a couple of quotes here on Audible because I listened to it. It talks about a life that comes out of chaos, an exhilarating story of a life that comes out of chaos. And the New York Times book review says, if I had my way, the whole world would look like a carnival. That's a quote from you. So chaos and carnival, what do those words mean to you?
Well, okay, carnival first is that when I was little, the one time I would be with my mother and father where we could be happy for 5 minutes was we would go to the rides, like whether they were the rides in Long Beach or wherever some carnival had dropped down, and the colors of those rides became what I wanted my life to look like. And I don't know, Brad, I know you stayed at my apartment, but did you stay there after I painted all my furniture and it looked like Pee-wee's Playhouse? I mean, look at you.
I don't,
Do you
my
remember?
memory isn't that good. I do
Okay,
remember a
well,
couple of stories from that time, but I don't think you were there then.
right. Well,
Yeah.
I was big into I'm big into color, and my world looking technicolor. Look at, I painted my furniture, right? It's
Yeah.
like 3 different colors of blue. And um so that's based on when I was happy, when I was little. And as far as chaos goes, I could not prevent the kind of chaos I grew up in. I mean, and it was either beauty born out of chaos or chaos destroying me. And it wasn't until I was 33 when, I sort of bottomed out and realized I was destroying myself. And frankly, Brad, I was not afraid of destroying myself. I wasn't afraid of dying. I was afraid of dying while I was alive, of
Mm.
actually living on the earth and not fulfilling my dreams, not being the composer I wanted to be, not being the artist I wanted to be. Because when I drank and took drugs, I did not have the concentration to write an opera. It wasn't until I stopped all that that I could even concentrate, I mean, I could always get it up for a song. Like you take a hit of speed, you can write a song, and it'll be a beautiful song because you can really focus on it, not the Grapes of Wrath, not Tibetan Book of the Dead, and so on. So that is it's the story, and beauty born out of chaos.
Yeah. Well, I think people will agree with that, and they'll agree that you've had a difficult life, you've had a remarkable life, but you've always been one of the happiest, cheeriest people that I know, despite all of that. You're like think of you as the Pee Wee Herman of composers, right?
Oh
The
my
Paul Rubens.
God.
RIP. But I wonder what's your secret for maintaining that kind of veneer, or have I just seen a little bit of that of your whole personality as far as being somebody who is basically optimistic?
I think it's because I wear it all on my sleeve. If you read that book, you would not think this guy's happy all the time. But when I'm happy, you're going to know it. And for example, today, I'm happy to talk to you. I'm happy to talk about my book. I'm proud I accomplished that because I never in a million years I would write like an almost 500-page memoir. I'm always happy to talk about my work, my operas, because by the time you hear them, I have overcome so many obstacles to get that into the world. How can I not be proud of having accomplished that? Do you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so there's a lot I'm happy about. And I'm, of course, Brad, I'm happy that, my two of my sisters died, my parents died. I mean, at one point, my whole community died, my lover died. Like, at this point, I have to have some joy about still being alive, period. And having, you know, because of what I went through when I was little, I have a sort of, I'm not saying this is a healthy thing, but there's a therapist, her name is Karen Horney, and she wrote a book called Neurosis and Human Growth. She writes about something called revenge glory, that often people who are taunted and tortured when they're little, when they grow up, they have this obsession with revenge glory. It's a little bit, I'll show them, right? It's not necessarily healthy, but it is what it is. And at this point, Brad, I feel like I showed them. I did eclipse them, you know, for better or worse. I made a name for myself. I truly believe I've done something with my life. I feel really good about my body of work. I've come through a lot. And so that joy is hard earned.
Yeah. I want to talk about this new recording of your musical Sycamore Trees, because, like many of your works, it has an autobiographical tie-in, sort of.
Yes.
And it also has a monologue that's dedicated to your lover, Jeffrey, who you talk about in the book, and who died from AIDS in the 1990s, I
He
believe.
died
I,
August 1st, 1996.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I remember you during that time, and I remember the dynamic that went on. You basically nursed him uh, through to the end, right? I wonder if you can talk a little bit about Sycamore Trees and then talk about Jeffrey's connection to that work.
Well, for my whole adult life, and I mean starting in college, I had a preoccupation with my family. I found my family fascinating. I was fascinated with my sisters growing up. I was fascinated with my mother. I was tortured by my father. But as you know in the book, he was both my tormentor, but also because he was so distant and icily cold and often violent and mean, I also sexualized him. I didn't know how to see him positively. And so I turned him into this god that I could at least objectify. And so my fascination with these people became my constantly trying to describe them accurately on paper. And finally, when Jeffrey died, it was like it was like someone threw an atom bomb at my life. First of all, just to say that grief was a word I had no idea what it really meant. And I had no idea what a foreign country it was. Yes, I had lost one person after another in the AIDS crisis. In the AA meetings, especially gay AA meetings, every day there would be another empty chair. I mean, you spent all your life at memorial services, at hospitals, visiting people. It was just, I worked at the gay men's health crisis. It was my whole life until finally it was nursing Jeffrey all the way until his death. It was writing him an opera for him to die to, the Buddhist teachings of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, because he wanted to die as a Buddhist. It was so remarkable, so sad, so exhilarating. But when he died, everything went from one thing to another. I will never be whoever I was before that. And so somehow his death cracked something open in me that I could finally see my family and my family piece in a sort of umbrella, in that his death and wanting to tell my family exactly what happened became the imperative for the whole piece to exist. And somehow what happens in Sycamore Trees is that in the piece, at first, it becomes he wants to tell the family his story, but then the family is like, because they're all such strong personalities, it becomes, I have a story too, and so do I, and so do I. So it really becomes everyone's story. And then that monologue that you're talking about, which is called basically the last night of Jeffrey's life, although in the piece it's David, is ultimately exactly moment for moment what happened, and it comes close to the end of the piece. And after that monologue, finally, the father embraces Andrew, who is me. They both weep, and then the father walks up the staircase, which basically there's a spotlight. He walks up it, and he's gone. So the last thing that happens for them is they connect, and it's very moving to me. And so the thing is, Brad, I never in a million years thought there would be a recording of Sycamore Trees. But what happened was the sound designer had given me a gift, and the gift was a board recording of the show. And the cast is amazing. It's like Judy Kuhn and Mark Kudish and Tony Yazbek, and everyone in it is a major star. And Jessica Molaski. So somehow Tommy Kraska from PS Classics got a hold of that board recording. And only in the last year, there is technology that can make a board recording sound like a studio recording. And he started sharing it with me, what he was doing to it. And I flipped. I mean, at first I just cried when he sent me the first number, which is called Let There Be Light. I was so moved. And so what will finally come out, and it's right now, just to say that there are some hurdles have to be jumped through with the Signature Theater, because there's some union things that have to be addressed, but the album is ready, and it will come out as soon as that all happens. And it will be a miracle, because I never expected it to happen. And it's one thing that, and you know this, Brad, if it was a studio recording, even if it was perfect, it would never have the immediacy and the danger of a live performance. This sounds like a studio recording, but it's an incredible live performance. I mean, so Mark Kudish sings this song called The Father Song, and when he's done, he starts howling. He bursts into tears, and that's on the recording. It's a very moving recording, I think. So it's a really rich, Brad, because the idea that we talk about God, I mean, that Sycamore Trees is going to come out somewhat close to the memoir I wrote about my whole life. It's very weird. It's very, it's how my life has always been. It's as if there is an invisible hand pulling me along, including saving me. You know, it's funny, Brad, it's so on my mind, but I just think people should know. I mean, I do not know whether you're writing music or whether you're singing, but it's so interesting that really, in a lot of ways, that's what brought us together. I mean, you were an artist I admired, and I love that we have that relationship, that you're not just interviewing me and I'm this celebrity or whatever. We had a connection, and that's what moves me about this. And that it's, for me, it's just, it's just further along the road of a friendship where I'm interested in you and you're interested in me. And I'm very grateful to be here talking to you, because I admire you. So, that's
Well, the
it.
feeling is mutual.
Thank you, Brad. Thank you. I hope someday you at least make some kind of recording of those songs for Doves and anything else you sang, and send it to me so that I could hear it again, because I even say in my book it's one of my favorite pieces of music.
Oh,
Right? The Knot Garden. I talk all about it and the electric
yeah.
guitar and right.
Yeah.
I was born.
Now that earworm is going to be in my head all day, right?
That updated Monteverdi, born on my birthday, by the way.
Yeah, right. I never thought of it that way, but that's great. Well, that just shows, a little bit of how your mind works as a composer, right? As a
Yes.
putting together great words. I mean, I noticed this in your autobiography. You spin out words that would sound great if spoken, like metaphors, like Shakespearean language, it's sort of, and you're dealing with uh, subjects that, are highly personal, but you're doing it in a formalized way. And a little bit, you talked about this a little bit toward the beginning of listening to your words um, that have kind of a Shakespearean resonance or a formal resonance to them, but you're talking about, you know, all the things you talk about.
Poop and sex among them.
Yes, exactly.
But it's important to say, Brad, especially with the sex, because not that I need to explain this to you, but that was not about salaciousness. It was about that the first thing I needed to write about, because I had just come out of a group of men that met for 10 years who had been, all right, I'm going to say the word sexually abused, but I don't like the word abused. I am just going to say this, Brad. The danger of my life was possibly because of my own precociousness and because of the fact that drugs and alcohol were so available in my life. Too many doors were opened before they should have been. And those open doors took me down paths that could have destroyed me and almost did. But in the end, they didn't. But I had to talk about that in the book because I think it's important to say, look at a 15-year-old on the street. Or if you have kids, look at a 15-year-old and then imagine what my sex life was like at that age. That was not healthy. Not only that, they were with men that were my heroes. They were with men that were heterosexual, and I was simply a dalliance. So for me, it would always feel like love. And for them, it was over the minute it ended. So I had to talk about the pain that set up in my life, the pain of expecting impossible things that would chase me for the rest of my life. And as far as talking about the other thing, I had to talk about my issues with my body. I mean, why would I write an opera of Ellen West? Who else has written an opera about a woman with the worst documented eating disorder ever documented? I have those issues, and why write a memoir? Like, we've all read memoirs where you put them down and feel like, I didn't learn anything about that person because I could tell they were writing from their idealized self. I had no need to do that. Like, why would I do that? I don't even know who the idealized me is. Do you know what I mean? So I did what I set out to do on some level. Should I have put it into the world? Well, I say late in the book, I don't know. Will it be like throwing a bomb at everything I've built? So far, it hasn't been.
Yeah, I don't see that happening at all. I think it's a wonderful addition to your whole oeuvre, right? All of your works.
Thanks for
Ricky
that.
Ian Gordon, composer, is the author of Seeing Through, A Chronicle of Sex, Drugs, and Opera. He also has his new musical, or his 2010 musical, Sycamore Trees, coming out on a new cast album that we've talked about. Ricky, it's great to see you after all this time, and thank you so much for making time for us.
Thank you, Brad. It's so great to see you too, and I hope I see you sooner rather than later.